With the new British Touring Car season over 100 days away, we take a look back at the 2023 campaign.
Hello and welcome to the British Touring Car Podcast. Russ, you join me once again, and we're going to have a take through on the 2023 Touring Car season. It was one of mixed weekends, shall we say. Two very good drivers this season, one just pretty much dominating, but some fairly, I'd say, mediocre performances throughout the rest of the grid.
Yeah, it's been a season of mixture, not least in terms of the weather. I think certain car packages came to the grid and underperformed, which we'll talk about. I think that you're being slightly harsh. I think there are two outstanding drives that dominated, and I've got some stats to back that up a bit later on. But yeah, it was a season of dominance, as we'll get to. I think the best place to start is to take a look back at who won what, just to remind listeners and viewers now, of course, on YouTube, how the 2023 season played out. So, obviously, for those who weren't aware, Ash Sutton did win the Drivers' Championship. He won that from... He did, I know. Shocking everyone. It was a completely unforeseen result, that one. But he did win it by 46 points over Tom Ingram. Allegiance, Napa, Ford, Motorbase, blue, yellow car thing won the manufacturers, or also known as the constructors. So that's where teams have got the backing of the actual factory in terms of who can race in that one, and they beat BMW to that title. In terms of the teams, well, Napa won that as well, beating Bristol Street Motors by an absolute landslide, 713 to 564. BMW in third position there. The only, I would say, interesting in that one Motorsport beat Toyota Gazoo Racing, so make of that what you will.
Wow.
The independent drivers, this was the only thing that Napa couldn't win this season without an independent teams, obviously, as they're not independents, they're manufacturers. And Josh Cook won the independent drivers for the 942nd time. So good for him. And the independent teams was won by One Motorsport. The Jack Sears Trophy could have been won by Napa. Sam Osborne was eligible, but he didn't deliver this year. It was Andrew Watson in his debut season who really did impress throughout the year, taking it through from Mikey Doble. And the Goodyear Wingfoot Award, Foot on a Plinth, great shiny trophy qualifying thing, was won by Ash Sutton as well. But then Napa did take 9 out of 10 poles, so that was also somewhat expected. So that's a quick run through of where things were for the season. As I say, Napa dominance throughout. And I think based on that, the best place to start this 2023 look back is just with Ash Sutton. What a year it's been for him and Napa, Allegiance, Motorbase, yellow, red, blue car thing, whatever they're being called now. But yeah, what a year it's been for Napa.
Yeah, it has been absolutely stunning. Some of his performances, especially in qualifying for me this year, taking 6 poles across the season from a driver that last year we said, he could have a little rick in him with qualifying, with the issues with track limits, getting his fastest time deleted, sort of things. He's really stepped that up this season.
I think that's a really good point, because coming into this season, if you were to name one weakness of Ash Sutton's weekends, you'd probably say it's qualifying, wouldn't you? Yeah. To be fair, and you're absolutely right. He's nailed this year. He's taken 6 poles, as you've rightly said. Napa have taken 9 out of 10, as I said a moment ago. I think you're spot on. Yeah, that he really has improved that quote weakness to his race weekend. And we've still got a little bit of the Ash Sutton of old. We've seen him do a couple of moves that weren't on, which ended in retirement. So I'm thinking with him and a certain magnet to pit walls at the start of races, which he seemed to do a couple of times this season. But, I mean, the scary thing is that had he not made those errors at Donington Park and Brands Hatch, I think it was the other one and Alton Park as well. I think he had a retirement at Brands Hatch as well with a start line incident.
Had one at Croft.
Oh, sorry, you're absolutely right. It was Croft. My apologies. And Alton Park and Donington Park. Had he not done that, you'd have probably banked into won the title, I reckon, at Silverstone.
Yeah, the lead that he would have had would have been outstanding. It already is outstanding, the points that he's finished ahead of Ingram in the championship. But as you say, those 3 retirements all came from a very similar source. And to start off the season with that start line incident at Donington, followed up with a fight back weekend and wasn't leading the championship, he was already kind of on the back foot at that point, but he certainly came back fighting in the next couple of rounds.
Yeah, absolutely. He's able to put, as you said there, put behind him any form of hardship. I
Yeah.
say hardship. That's probably slightly loaded or strong term in the season, but you know what I mean. Yeah, he bounced back from anything like that. As you say, retired at Alton Park, got in the final race there, then got a second and a first at Croft. Retired in the third race at Croft, and then went on to get a second and a first at Knockhill. And actually, that race, second race at Knockhill, the speed he had was
Oh yeah.
ridiculous. And actually, to then win the reverse grid race at Knockhill from having finished the previous race in second just shows how good he's been all season.
It was a bit mental that third race at Knockhill though.
Yeah, it was. But then equally, the first race at Knockhill was mental. He was winning that fairly comfortably
Yeah.
until the rain came down. So
Yeah.
yeah, it's one of those, isn't it, where he's had a lot to contend with in terms of the weather. Donington Park at the opening of the weekend was another example, wasn't it, where they got it wrong on tyres, and actually at the end of the Donington Park weekend, he only got a 15th and a third. I say only, but at that point, Tom Ingram had certainly had a better weekend, as had Colin Turkington, as had Jake Hill. Sutton, yeah, had a few problems that weekend, and then after that, he just went on a ridiculous point scoring form. He took 10 wins over the season. I think he took 22. Let me just get my stats up.
Wasn't it 12,
Sorry, 12 wins.
wins
12
the
wins over
season?
the
Yeah.
season. My apologies. 20 podiums. So 2/3 of the podiums available he took, which is
Ridiculous.
nonsense. And he won 4 races in a row, with the final 2 at Brands Hatch and then the first 2 at Snetterton. So yeah, he's just been a phenomenon this season,
That
hasn't he?
that Brands Hatch Indy weekend is a little bit standout for me. The fact that he took fastest lap in each race, he
Yeah.
won the second 2 and finished second in the first race. I like it's almost that perfect weekend, and it was quite amazing to see him do that coming back from Donington.
Yeah. I think the one I would highlight for him as I agree with you entirely, but the other one I'd highlight for me would be Snetterton.
Yeah,
Two firsts and a fourth at a track that doesn't necessarily suit him or the car.
yeah,
It's been a BMW stronghold for over the years, and actually Tom Ingram always goes well at Snetterton as well, and he did this year, to be fair to him. But I think I think that's the scary thing, if you like, for Sutton this year, is that he's taken big results at rear-wheel drive circuits, where we tend to write off the front-wheel drive cars at Snetterton, a little bit at Alton Park, and a little bit at Croft, and occasionally Knockhill as well. Depends. Jake Hill's dominated there in the past,
yeah.
and he's gone there and made a mockery of that suggestion, isn't he?
So if we're looking at one-off races for Sutton, for me, I think there are 2 standout ones. There is that one that you've already mentioned at Knockhill, and then when he had that poor first race at Silverstone and in race 2 just obliterated everyone.
Yeah.
Both him and Ingram fighting back through the field had a poor race one and then just showed their absolute class.
Yeah, and I think that's a good example of, you say, bouncing back from hardship. That race 1 at
Yeah,
Silverstone hadn't gone their way for either driver because of the weather and changeable conditions, and then they came from literally the back of the grid to win a race and come second in Ingram's case. With Sutton, then I'm not going to go down the line of the Napa dominance and whether it's good or bad. We've covered that to death throughout the
yeah,
season. I think we both agree that we'd like to see a closer championship next year, but on the same side, a one-off season of dominance isn't necessarily a bad thing.
no,
It's only when you start to get 7 years of Mercedes dominance, or now 3 years of Red Bull dominance, things start to get boring.
yeah,
I don't think that will happen. I think that Tom Ingram has already intimated that Accelerate are going to be really stepping up their program over the winter, and given BMW's performance, which I'll come to after the next topic, I think we'll see a closer grid next year. But for this year, you just got to applaud it. Sutton is the first driver to win multiple championships in front-wheel drive and rear-wheel drive machinery. He's the youngest 4-time champion, and if he sticks around in the sport, and all indications are that he will, I think he'll break every record available to him. It's just been a phenomenal season, and I think you've got to applaud it.
yeah. Especially if he's going to continue going forward and winning nearly double-figure races each season. The competition is almost his oyster, isn't it? As long as he gets a decent car and he can get his teeth into it, along with his engineer Tony Carosa, who I think has been a massive, massive part of his
Yeah,
success and development, especially after last season where we saw that Sutton was struggling in that car, trying to find the right setup. Um, they went into the off season and pre season for this year knowing what they had to do and where they needed to focus on. And I thought that interview at the final round with Carosa was really interesting, actually.
agreed. Um, I think we should move on there then from Sutton, and we're going
Yep.
to give a quick word, I think, to Tom Ingram, who has been a
Mm.
worthy adversary throughout the year. You can see the respect that him and Sutton hold for each other. They are by far and away the best two drivers on the grid. I just want to pay
Yep.
tribute to Ingram because if you look at his stats for the year, 17 podiums, so
Mm.
only three less than Sutton. Uh, he had the lowest point scoring position of all year was 10th. He had 23 top six finishes. Um, Only two non-finishes all season, one of which was disqualification for ride height at Knock Hill.
Yep.
And then I think it's the stat that I think bears him the most fruit. So his points total of 400 would have been enough to win the championship in 2022, 2021, 2020, 2019, 2018, 2017, 2016, 2015, and 2013. The only two seasons in the last 10 or so would have been 2012 and 2014 where his points total wasn't enough. So that just shows you how good he has been this season, how
Yeah.
consistent he's been this season, and he's been a real thorn in Sutton's side. Whilst that Napa has been quick and it has been dominating races, Ingram just has not gone away. And if Sutton finished first, more often than not, Ingram finished second.
I was just about to mention that if you look through their finishes across the season, you see where Sutton's won, Ingram's either comes second or third, or if Ingram has beaten Sutton, it's only been by like one position or something like that.
Yep.
They've really stuck to each other like glue this season. You're right, Tom Ingram has been the only creditable challenger this season.
Yes.
There hasn't been any consistency from the BMWs. They've struggled for setup. Um, yes, okay, they finished third and fourth in the championship, but Turkington was 60 points off of Hill, let alone Ingram and Sutton. So there is a massive difference between the top two and the rest of the championship this year.
Let's talk BMW because there's not much else to say on Ingram apart from he's been a really
Mm.
worthy challenger and
Yep.
he'll come back strong, no doubt about that. But yeah, I think that BMW really have been a disappointment this season, haven't they?
Mm.
But they're not my biggest disappointment of the season. We'll come to that in our final awards at the end of the pod. But considering that, on the side of their trucks, they've got how many years they've won the manufacturers, and they've won it
Right.
so many times in a row and
Yeah.
whatnot, and they've got the best drivers in Turkington and Hill and all this, that, and the other. They were really bad this year. They were
If you
really bad.
if you pardon the pun, I think Turkington is over the hill. Hill is still got some things to iron out, some setup to work out. Yes, he's quick in the wet in a BMW. He's by far the quickest of the four of them. But there's inconsistency there, and there's still a little bit of hot headedness.
There is, but I also think there's politics at play as well within the
Yeah,
garage. That Hill
definitely.
isn't number one driver in my view, in WSR's view. I might be completely wrong, but in my looking at it from an outside, it seems to me that Turkington is still very much the number one driver.
Yeah.
And I think Hill probably deserves to be number one driver. And I think there's that little bit of politics. We've seen that he's not got on particularly well with Colin, particularly on the track. They have rubs, they have banged door handles in a way that you can never say, looking back through Turkington's teammates, with the exception of perhaps Jason Plato, have you seen people dare touch Colin Turkington, who's a teammate? Stephen Jelly would rather ditch it into a tyre stack than he would, barge Colin Turkington. Rule number one of WSR is you do not touch Colin. And
Yeah,
Hill was disregarding that.
Turkington and Collard always used to get on really well because Collard always knew that he played second fiddle, and if Turkington was having a bad race, he'd need to pick up the points.
And Collard would just hit everybody else.
Whereas Hill and
Rob Collard, by the way, just to clarify.
And Hill, all credit to him, it doesn't care for it really, does he? He's very much racing for himself, and I think that the position that he's got himself into, yes, he's part of that WSR tree, as it were, but he's very much a branch out on his own with his own team, his own mechanics, his own backroom staff, as it were, that are all set for his development. And his development over the last couple of seasons has been excellent. He's constantly on an upward trajectory. This year it's flattened out a little bit. But I think
Ooh,
how.
I think that's harsh. I think that's harsh. So it's flattened out.
I don't think he was as good as last season.
I think that's a fair comment, but I think that the car is weaker this year. He's still taken
Possibly.
6 wins.
Yeah.
He's had no retirements all season,
No.
so even when he's been in adversity, rather than just ditch it, he's tried to keep going.
Yeah.
He's got a really I don't want to give away all my stats now, so I'll come back. Well, okay, I'm going to give away my
stats. Give
them
all away.
He's got the second longest point scoring streak in this season with 18 straight point finishes. I'll get to the other two who are worth mentioning later on. Although Colin Turkington is top of 19 actually, so. But the problem with Turkey this season is that while they've been point scoring finishes, they've been fairly mid pack to a degree. I think Hill is still a very good driver, and I think he has been by far the best BMW driver this year. You don't beat Colin Turkington by 60 points, as you say, unless you're very good. I think the worrying thing for WSR is that Colin's been beaten by well over 100 points, nearly 150 by the eventual winner, which is an absolute chasm in terms of what BMW want to be able to do. I don't think the Adam Morgan experiment has worked particularly well, albeit it's his first season, so you've got to give him a little bit of time. But on the flip, then you say give him time, but he should be used to the car. Yes, it's a slightly different setup behind the scenes and whatnot, but he should be used to the car. And I don't think it's been a particularly profitable season for him. And then there's Stephen Jelly, who is Stephen Jelly.
Yeah. On the Morgan debate, I do wonder whether he's having to adapt to not being the main man in the team, because of course he has been for the last 10 years being in his own team like that.
Yeah, possibly.
He has taken some decent results along the way. He's had 4 podiums this year, and he's kind of finished in the championship around about where I'd expect him. Okay, his points total might not be as high, but I don't think everyone's points total has been high, except for the top 2.
Yeah, that's fair.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I don't think it's failed this season for Morgan.
No, I don't think it's failed.
It certainly hasn't worked as well as it could.
I agree with you. I think next season's key to see how that goes. Yeah. I will say what we said at the start of the season. We went to test day, which feels a lifetime ago now. But I still can't understand why BMW didn't do any or very few wet weather running, apart from Jake Hill, who was then quite good in the wet as the season went on. Is that a coincidence?
It's been a wet season as well.
It has been a wet season. Is that too much of a coincidence? Is that too simplifying things? I don't know. But the fact of the matter is that Hill did a lot of wet running that day and was the best wet running BMW throughout the season.
Yeah.
Take from that what you will. But yeah, it's been a disappointing year for BMW. They're really going to have to bounce back. And I don't know. Do they make driver changes? Do they? I don't know, because if you look at it, Hill has been their best performing driver by far, but hasn't been perfect. Turkington's been quite disappointing, if I'm being perfectly honest. He's lacked, it's becoming a bit of a cliche for me to say, but he seems to have lacked a bit of racecraft and will-to-will racing ability. Jelly has been either caught up in somebody else's incident or creating incidents. And Morgan, the jury's still out. So do you take on somebody the new season, and if so, who?
I think the interesting thing is what we heard towards the end of the season was that Jelly has an option for next year, but it's very much down to him whether he wants to take that option. Now, I think if he doesn't want to take that option, he's an older driver on the grid, certainly. I wonder whether he wants to go off and do other things once again, which he has done before. But then who do you come in to fill that kind of role? Do you bring in a younger driver? Do you bring in an experienced driver that is going to try and bag you some points? That is going to be the interesting one for me. I think the other 3 will probably stay the same. I think there's only a question over Jelly.
Okay, I'm not going to go into the full rumour mill at the moment, but I'm going to come up with a grand sort of that meme of Charlie Day with all the bits on the board. But I think Turkington doesn't come back. I think his kids have started racing, and I think he might want us to take a step back to support those. Okay. I think that Jelly doesn't come back. I think Hill doesn't stay at the team. I think he moves across somewhere else. got a sneaking suspicion he might end up. I don't want to say at this stage, but well, okay. I think he might end up at Motorbase, back at Motorbase, or
with
what is now.
with
Yeah,
Sutton and Camish.
yeah, and I think they might try and build a super team. We'll see.
Okay,
But I think that
that has all the signs of going badly for me,
it does.
especially with
But
the type of driver that Hill is
yeah,
and the size of his team that
yeah,
are pushing him in the direction he's going.
yeah.
I'm not sure going to a team like Napa Alliance Racing would be beneficial.
No, I can understand that. But to be fair, if Turkington does take a step back, I think Hill probably would end up staying at WSR on reflection because he would then be the main man. But there's a lot of rumours that Watson is being looked at as a
Yeah.
potential option for there. There's also rumours that Bobby Thompson is being looked at for there. And of course, Rob Huff has been in and out of the championship and has raced at WSR before, if I'm not mistaken. So possibly a route back in for him there. I think Morgan comes back because I think he has to for at least another year. But yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if we see some wholesale changes at BMW next year without getting too much into the gossip columns at this stage.
That's fair
And
enough.
I think we'll see a car change as well.
Okay.
I
Well,
think they might give the new 1 Series a go. Personally,
we will. Go on.
I was going to say I think hatchback might be. I think there might be a shift towards hatchback in the coming years.
We'll see. We'll see how it develops. Of course, any updates like that, we will bring you in the off season. We'll try and nail it all together in a couple of news packages that we'll try and bring out. Shall we move on to the Jack Sears? That's been a very interesting one this season. I've liked keeping up with Jack Sears this year because there have
Yeah,
been a selection of very good drivers in that bracket, and it's certainly brought out a surprise winner in my books.
yeah, so we still get a few comments about people not fully understanding how the Jack Sears work. So just to quickly run over
Yep,
the rules of that, anybody who hasn't taken a touring car podium at the start of a season is eligible for the Jack Sears Trophy.
yep,
So that means this year, obviously, you had all debutants go straight in there because they can't have had a trophy, and then there's some older names in there that have been in the sport for a while. I say a while, but relatively speaking, Sam Osborne has been in the sport for a couple of years now, as has Jack Butel,
yep.
just for 2 examples, and Nick Hamilton for 3, who haven't got a trophy, so they can stay in here. Some people have said, well, Crease hasn't got a trophy and he's won the Jack Sears in the past, or Bobby Thompson hasn't got a trophy coming into the season, but if you win the Jack Sears, you then can't stay
Yeah,
in the Jack Sears.
which
You
I
move on.
think is a good idea as well because
Agreed.
it's almost that sign of progression within the championship. Being able to take a podium signifies that you've either had a lucky weekend, or you've had a very good weekend, and your standard of driving has upped itself.
Yeah, so on that basis, Sam Osborne and Andrew Watson will both be ineligible for the trophy next year because Watson has won the trophy and
Yep.
taken podiums anyway, and Sam Osborne took a podium earlier in the year at Donington Park, keeping his head very well in the wet conditions. So, yeah, that's a quick overview of how it works. And you're right, it's been a phenomenal season in the Jack Sears trophy
Yes.
standings. I'm very much looking forward to opening our envelopes when we do the I don't know what we might lump that in with the award show because we're
Yeah.
not going to be able to do it today because I'm not with you. Or we might do a separate pod for that. We'll discuss that off air probably. That's probably the best way.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, but yeah, it's been a great season in terms of the Jack Sears Trophy. I think there's some really good drivers in that category. Watson has obviously come in and really shone this season, and I hope we see him next year because I think he's been brilliant. Mikey Doble, when he was announced, I was very meh. He's a clubman racer with a very limited racing CV. Boy, have I had to eat some humble pie on that one this year because
Yeah.
he's been fantastic as well. And I think the only driver to stop Napa's pole dominance was Mikey Doble in a 1992 Vauxhall Astra. Yeah,
And absolutely no one saw that coming, did they?
no, absolutely not. So he's been brilliant. And then Dexter Patterson in third. You know I like Dex, and I don't want to get to Russell's going to say the line again, but you know I like Dex, and I think he's slightly unlucky not to have won the trophy, but to finish joint second, I think it's a bloody good achievement.
Yeah, very much so. It's pleasantly surprised me that PMR and to have two drivers like that in a team that's expanded, um, both vying for that title towards the end of the season. I think is a real credit to that team because they've done it. They've done it the right way, haven't they?
They have. They've backed themselves. There's been a lot of clamour, not least from myself and yourself at times, to get a better car or a newer car,
Yeah,
or just ditch the Vauxhall entirely. They've had a lot of driver turmoil. Drivers don't tend to stay there very long. And there's been some question marks over the teams running, again, not least from us. And this season, they really have doubled down and backed themselves. They went to
yeah,
a three-car team. I think both of us at the time thought that was mental,
yeah.
and shows how little we know about managing touring car teams, because Adam Weaver and the gang have done a phenomenal job in making that PMR competitive again. Because I think there's a real fear at the start of the season it would be this year's Passat from a couple of years, CC from a couple of years ago,
Yeah.
and would be just there to make up the numbers. And they have found a real way to make that car competitive and compete at the front end of the grid and not look out of place at the front end of the grid. They've brought in two rookies that have really, really impressed.
Have.
I think the only problem they're going to have is, can they run a car team next year? Given that, I think there will be interest in all three drivers from other teams.
I very much wonder whether they'll look to change the car. I know we said it last season, but I think they might look to change the car for next season. There have been sneaky suspicions over possibly bringing the Leon, the Cupra Leon, in, but we'll see. They've run it in TCR. Obviously, I know it's a different spec in that series, but they have the capacity to do it.
A lot will depend on that one, I think, about what happens with Team Hard next year and how many licenses they have, and therefore how many cars they need to sell. I think that will be a key component for that. But yeah.
But yeah, all credit to them this year. I mean,
Oh yeah.
Watson and Dobble between them have taken 14 wins in Jack Sears, which is outstanding, really. And all the wins in the Jack Sears were spread between the five drivers: Watson, Dobble, Patterson, Osborne, and Pearson. It'll be interesting to see whether we get any new drivers for next season that go obviously straight into the Jack Sears, and which teams they go to, and then how competitive they're going to be.
There is one name that is, I'd say, I'm not turning this entirely into a gossip column, but Dan Zelos would be good to have in the championship, and would of
Very
course go
much so.
straight into that championship. I would like to see Dan Zelos at this level, but we'll have to
Yep.
see if he can get a deal together over the winter break in that regard. So yeah, it's been a good year for the Jack Sears. I'm slightly disappointed for Dobber he didn't win it, but equally, either the PMR drivers deserve to win it, and Dobber will be eligible next year as well, so he'll have a second bite at the cherry, as will Patterson. I think everyone in there apart from Watson and Osborne, as I say, will be eligible for next season.
Yeah.
Where do you want to go next?
I want to hear some stats from you for this season.
Well, you've had the majority.
You've been doing your research, and I know you've got some surprising ones to ping up along the way.
Yeah, so I've sprinkled some stats in throughout, as you've heard. Hopefully, you've enjoyed those little pieces of data. I'm a data man. I'm going to just mention this one again. The longest point scoring streaks, that's consecutive point scoring positions. Obviously, Turkey, as I said, got 19.
Yeah.
Hill was second with 18. Now, the surprise that, as far as I can see in my maths, and I appreciate maths is never my strong point, so I'm willing to be corrected by anyone, but I have in third Ricky Collard with 17 straight point scoring results. And I think Collard has been a real standout this year in the touring cars. He has, in that Toyota, been by far and away the better of the three drivers.
Yeah.
I think he's completely outclassed Rory Butcher, which is a surprise, given Butcher knows the car just as well as Collard does.
I mean, the fact that at the start of the season, Collard was like, "Nah, I'm done with racing," and then was convinced to come back. It's been a real good thing for him, I think. Yes, there's been some controversy along the way in his season, but he's also showed that old age fighting spirit, hasn't he?
Yeah, there has been, but let's be honest, he was the closest that they've come to taking a win all season.
No, Butch took a win at Donington.
Oh, he did take a win. My apologies. Yeah. You're right. He did take a win at Donington. Okay, fair enough. But Collard would have had the first win. And look, we debated the track limits at the time, and I've changed my mind on it slightly, having seen Hill take a win on the final day of the season with Rallycross. I think that has made the whole thing a complete mockery.
There has been a certain amount of talk on social media about that move.
It's not. If you're Ricky Collard, you're really annoyed. I think you've got a really good case for Ricky Collard, because yes, we discussed at the time, if you breach track limits, you get a warning, and you got to stop. But if Hill can take a win by Rallycross, then I don't know where the rules are. But anyway, well, yeah,
Track
there's not
limits
much
won't
else
be
to
any
say on that.
observed there, mate.
No, but he's left the track. Let's not go into it. It's a nonsense decision, and Hills, yeah, we'll leave that one.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think Collard has been a really good driver this year. He's had pace at pretty much every single round. He has turned up where his teammates haven't. I think it's fair to say we're both disappointed with Gamble this year in terms of how little he's been able to adapt to the car. And yes, it's rear wheel to front wheel drive. And I think it's the first time he's probably raced front wheel drive machinery, having come from the Porsches. And there is stuff to learn of that. Completely agree, completely understand that. But it hasn't been a particularly good season for him. And Butcher, and it's not just sour grapes on my part because I tipped him for the championship at the start of the season, but Butcher really hasn't delivered in the way we expected him to either.
Not at all. And I mean, he's finished, what, 30, 44 points behind Collard. And Collard's points finishes this season, he's actually had more points finishes than Sutton.
There you go.
Which just stands out to me in the fact that when he's finished races, he's finished races in the points. Yes, two of those were retirements, but he's done everything that he needed to.
Yeah.
Um,
Wait,
and
he's only failed to finish in the points 3 times all season, and as you say, 2 of those are retirements, which I
yeah,
think that's pretty damn impressive.
it is very much so.
And you know, yeah, I don't think he's necessarily got the credit he deserves for this season because he's a bit controversial and he perhaps lets his emotions run his head at times.
Yeah.
But I think Collard can take a lot away from this season. Now, I thoroughly hope to have him back on the grid next year. Possibly WSR bound, of course, with the Collard links to WSR. And he has raced at WSR before, of course.
Yeah, if you told me at the start of the season that Collard would, one, finish ahead of Butcher and two, finish in the top 8 of the championship, I'd have probably said no.
I'd agree with
So
you.
credit to him for a good season.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I just want to we've talked about PMR and the Jack Sears. I think it's only right we give Aaron Taylor Smith a quick nod as well in terms of how well they've done this season. He's been very good, particularly in the second half of the season, and good to see him back on the podium as well. So that covers that off before we get any upset Aaron Taylor Smith fans saying
Yeah,
we forgot about him.
the front end of his season was a little hit and miss. Retirement sprinkled in there, but as you say, those 2 podiums in the latter end of the season, and the car looked quick, didn't it, at points?
It sure did. The only other stat I've got that's probably worth mentioning is the fewest retirements of the year. I think this has a lot to reliability that neither Hill or Ingram had a single retirement throughout the year. Ingram's was disqualified on the first race of Knock Hill for
He
ride height,
finished the
but
race, didn't he?
he finished the race exactly. And Hill has finished every race he started, which is incredible.
You've in this championship, you've got to have a good car, be that mechanical reliability or keeping yourself out of incidents, which is the 2 main reasons that you have a retirement. And those 2 drivers, Hill probably more surprisingly keeping himself out of incident, but Ingram, we know that's part and parcel of his driving style, his driving attitude, and it's a credit to both teams to have such good reliability.
Yeah, and as going back to Ingram and Hill to a lesser extent, normally that kind of record would win you a championship.
Yeah,
it's just we've had a bit of a freak year with Sutton being so dominant, as we said at the top of the pod. Yeah, I mean, where should we go now? Should we look at our awards this season, or is there any other teams or drivers you want to particularly discuss before we go into the awards?
yeah. I think we'll have a look at our awards for this season, and then we'll finish on our favourite aspects of the season.
And one thing we change for next year, don't forget that. That's
Yes,
coming
of
up
course.
as well. Okay, so in terms of the award for the driver of the year, we've both agreed it'll be Sutton or Ingram. It's going to be Sutton. If it wasn't Sutton, it'd be Ingram. So we're going to say, take that as read. Obviously, Sutton is driver of the year. If it wasn't him or Ingram, who would you have picked? So Sam, would you like to go first on that one?
For me, it would have to be Watson. The way that he's come into the championship, he's finished 15th overall, ahead of drivers like Moffat, Osborne, Gamble, who have all had seasons or good seasons in the touring cars. He's
Wins in some case.
only just finished behind Chilton, and to go and take that Jack Sears title in the way that he did, with some of those performances throughout the season, very much in the wet races, has very much surprised me. And I think he's been a brilliant addition to the championship.
Fair enough. Mine will probably not come as a surprise to many people as I champion him all year long. Bobby Thompson for me. He
Yeah,
has driven well above the capabilities of that car, I think. He has outshone every one of the other 219 drivers that have taken the seat at this season at the team. Um, he has Lloyd is no slouch, and I think he comprehensively beat Lloyd throughout the season. For the time he was there.
yeah,
Obviously, took a podium in that car, looked very comfortable running at the sharp end of the grid. I think the thing that stood out to me the most is that he came back via at Silverstone and was the highest qualifying hard car.
yeah,
That, yeah, having been out for a couple of races, and you've got to think where's his head at that point. Where is your head? It's going to be difficult because of the uncertainty and all that emotion of being back. So gets on the job, fastest hard car, having been out for a while. So yeah, for me, it's Bobby Thompson. I know he's not done the full season, but I think that makes it even more impressive in a way. Just look at the points he's scored, look at the finishes he's had, and he's a bloody quick driver, and he needs to be on the grid next year. Yeah, absolutely.
yeah. If there are any sponsors out there that's for some reason are listening to this, then Bobby Thompson is probably the man that you need to get behind for next season, because he's got an incredible talent, and a gift for driving, at the moment, bad cars in the sport. So just think about what he could actually do if he gets given good machinery, and especially if he can take someone like Barry Ploughman with him wherever he goes. Then I think he's onto a winner.
I think he'd have been probably above Chilton and Lloyd. Actually, I think he'd have finished around about the 12th spot if he'd had the full season.
Yep.
Yeah, two podiums in that car, where I think the next best result is probably around about a sixth, maybe, or fifth or sixth, maybe.
He's had 2/5 in that car. He's had 2/6 in that car. He's well outperformed what we would expect of it. Lloyd's had a fifth in the car and a seventh, being his best results of the season. But yeah, he's just done very well.
I about wanted to pick on Michael Crease. He obviously was a replacement, and the drop off was perhaps expected, but I think it just shows what a calibre of driver Bobby is.
Yeah, yeah, very much so.
Okay, villain of the year. I've gone for, unsurprisingly, perhaps Rory Butcher. Yeah, it's just not gelled for him this year at all, is it? It's just not gelled for him at all. I don't know if there's been any problems away from the track we don't know about, or if it's just been one of those years, but it just hasn't gone his way. Every time he's been in a position where it looks like it might be something has gone wrong, whether it be on the
Yep.
car or a mistake or a contact. Yeah, I was expecting more from Butcher, as I think we all know by now. And the fact that did he get top 10 in the end of the
Yeah,
championship?
he got
He
10th
did.
overall.
10th, yeah, 10th overall. I was expecting him to be sort of top 6 candidate, really. And given Toyota put their backing into the team as a manufacturer, just disappointed is the word I'd use. Hopefully see a better showing for him next time.
My villain of the season, I was tossed up between two, really. Gamble has had a poor season for Toyota compared to what he did last time out
Agreed.
for Sicily. I don't know whether that's a case of unreliability in that Toyota at times, also struggling to swap across to a front wheel drive car, and then the other driver is Dan Camish. And Camish had
Mm.
such a positive start to the season, taking 2 wins at Donington. I think he left there leading the championship. We were thinking, okay, this is going to be the year that he's going to be back on it. He's going to be up there with Sutton, with Ingram, with Hill, with Turkington, challenging towards that title. And then his luck this season for incidents and getting caught up in things has been really, really quite bad at times. No one can account for that brake failure at Donington GP. That is just unfortunate. And performances behind that, though, they haven't been quite good enough for me. So I think Camish is going to be my villain of the season, because I was expecting him to be challenging for that probably top 3 in the championship, top 4. And he's finished 6th overall. Yes, he was withdrawn from that Donington weekend. Who would have known what he could have done, knowing the weekend that he had at the start of the season? But in the end, if you look at the facts, he's just under 200 points off of Sutton, which is a
Yeah,
massive total for someone who we know is such a good driver.
yeah. I mean, this might be a slightly too harsh a comparison, but it's almost Perez vibes, isn't it? That you've got
Yeah.
a really dominant car, and you've got a driver who is dominating the championship, and his teammate is a long way off. Um, there's
In my
similarities.
mind, Dan Rowbottom isn't as good as Camish, I don't think.
Not yet,
But
not yet.
Rowbottom's finished less than 30 points behind him.
Robot's had a solid season. To be
He
fair to him,
has. He
he
has.
has had a solid season. He's improving all the time. I think that is key. And obviously, don't forget that Robot had to come into this season with the baggage of the Barrys on social media hating him because he's
Yeah.
the sole reason that Dynamics had fallen off the grid. So it was all
Yeah.
damn Robot's fault and he's evil and whatnot. So obviously, Camish didn't have those comments surrounding him. But yeah, I agree with you. I think Camish has been a disappointment this year. I think he expects to be challenging, and he's now had a car that can challenge because it's won and dominated the season,
Yeah.
and he hasn't made the best of it. I think.
No, not at all. He's had 2 poles in the season, 3 wins, and a further 3 podiums. It's not good enough if you want a championship.
Well, it's not considering that Rowbottom has also had 1 win and 3 podiums himself. So he's 4 podiums
4
himself.
podiums, yeah.
And of course, Rowbottom's also sacrificed himself a couple of times and his
He
weekend
has.
a couple of times for Sutton too. So yeah, I can understand why you've come to that. I can completely understand that. Okay,
Who's your, go on.
go on? No, I'll go first. Go on. You can ask me.
Who is your surprise good of the season then, mate?
This might be one. This one might be one we agree on. I think we've discussed it at length in the pod already. It's PMR for me.
Okay.
Everything that's been said earlier in the pod, repeat here, cut and paste. They came into the season with 3 cars, which was deemed as a bit of a risk. They've opted to keep the old car, and they've done really, really well. For me, yeah, it's PMR. I hope they continue their upward trajectory next season.
I can completely see why you said them. That the fact that they did go for that extra car this season, we thought they were going to struggle, but their form certainly in the second half of the season has been very, very good. And the natural speed that they've got out of the car is very encouraging. But that's not who I'm going for.
Oh, okay. I'm interested. Then go on.
I am actually going to go for Ricky Collard.
Okay.
I was expecting the fact that he wanted to give it all up at the end of last season and wasn't willing to come back, and he had to be convinced into driving again this season, to then go on to be the top performing Toyota, to go and finish that many races in the points this season, is not something I was expecting from him. And yes, I know he's a bit of the old school type. He likes a bit of a Barney on the track sometimes, but I kind of like to see that. Yes, it has to be within the limits of the rules and stuff like that. But yeah, he's pleasantly surprised me this season.
Has my stat done it for you then? Did that tip the balance?
It helped. When having a closer look at his season, I didn't realise that it's only 3 non-finishes or non-point scores that he's had. It's a shame he has only had that 1 podium. If that is any criticism that I could have had, there are a couple of fourths in there that maybe should have been converted into podiums and helped him build his championship position. But over 200 points and 8th in the championship, yeah, pleasantly surprised.
Yeah, but when you look at the people that beat him to those podiums on those particular cases, I'm going to guess that they're going to be BMWs, Nappers, and Hyundai. So it's going to be Hill, Sutton, and Ingram that have beaten him each time, who are just that level above. So I think that's fair play, fair comment.
Yeah.
Who is your surprise bad of the year?
Surprise bad was a little difficult. I know we've had a merry-go-round at hard, so it would be easy to pick.
That's not a surprise, though, is it?
No, exactly. So it would be easy to pick one of those. But for me, is it a surprise? Probably not. I kind of want to go Nick Halstead. I knew he wasn't going to do well. Let me just caveat this with I knew he wasn't going to do well. yes, he scored 2 points finishes, but they were in topsy turvy races at Donington and Knockhill in the wet, where
He still did it.
chaos happened.
Yeah, but
Yes,
he's still got to score the points.
but the amount of incidents that he had across the season where we saw him in a gravel trap in qualifying or in a gravel trap in a race, I'm just like, he's been well off the back. And the the fact that he's got that drive this season, for me, is very much down to money.
But you,
Um,
but I don't necessarily disagree with anything you're saying, but I can't still work out how this is a surprise bad for you. I don't think anybody expected
I don't
great.
know. I thought in that team he was going to be better than he should have been,
Okay,
and that's what I've based that on.
okay.
That's a surprise, isn't it?
My surprise bad is your surprise bad. I'll go for, and this is slightly controversial, but I'm going to argue my case quite well. I think One Motorsport are my surprise bad.
Okay.
They won the independent team trophy because they were up against a carousel of drivers with Team Hard and against a team that had two rookies in their midst. So
Yep.
yeah, okay, they've won it, but they should be. And they've won the independent drivers again because they should be, because they didn't really have any real competition in there, given PMR adapting to a 3-car team. And Bobby Thompson, who was pushing Cook all the way, then dropped out at the point where it was quite close to the championship. And I would have liked to have seen how that would have played out. I think Cook would have still won, but I think Bobby would have pushed him all the way. I think Moffat has been absolutely nowhere all year.
What did I say last season?
But we're talking about a race winner who's really struggling in that car. Cook has done well. Don't get me wrong. He's dragged the arse out of that car to get it into the point scoring positions. But generally, he's struggled to get it higher than 8th. Apart from when you predict him to finish 8th and he gets a 6th. But but generally speaking, he's struggled to take it higher than an 8th. There's a couple of exceptions to the rule. Don't get me wrong. But he's been around that. He's not been at the sharp end, at the pushing for race wins or podiums, has he? Generally speaking.
No, a lot of his finishes look like they've been between 5th and 8th.
There's been, obviously there was the Will Powell situation, which would have destabilised things, and Edwards has come in and at times has looked quite good, at times hasn't looked quite good.
Yep.
I think that at the start of the season they were getting the team dynamics chassis, they were getting the team dynamics mechanics data, all information, everything was looking rosy. They built their own engine, and Josh Cook last year was saying that if only they had an engine that worked, they'd be champion, at the front of the grid all the time, not just at Thruxton, and he'd be winning races. And that didn't happen. They built their own engine, and it was probably slightly worse than last year, for being honest. The only weekend they looked convincing was the weekend Barry Plowman was with them. At Thruxton.
Where we knew they were probably going to go well anyway, and they still didn't win.
No, but they did look better.
Yes.
But no, I think that's my point, that Cook hasn't taken a race win this season. Nope. He's done very well to take some podiums along the way, don't get me wrong, but you expect that from Cook because he does drive above and drive around problems very well. He's one of the more adaptable drivers on the grid, I think. But they've just been very meh everywhere else. Moffat has been a real disappointment over the season as a whole. Edwards is so unlucky not to score points in some ways, but in other ways, should it have taken to the last race of the season to be in that position? I'm being slightly harsh, maybe, as Teddy pops up in the background. But yeah, when you look at the car and you look at the potential and the pre-season buzz and the new sponsorship and all this, that, and the other, I just think it ended up being really disappointing. And let's say you can chuck at me that they've won 2 titles, and I'll chuck back at you. Yeah, well, where's the competition?
Yeah. No, I completely understand why you've gone for them. I think they had a very turbulent off-season, which didn't help. There were a lot of changes that went on there from the switch over from Btcc to One Motorsport. Obviously, Will Powell looked like he was a fairly big part of that. So him being unceremoniously kicked out midway through the season of all his roles, there's question marks about what's gone on behind the scenes there.
For legal reasons we're not going to debate.
Yeah, exactly. I'm sure it will probably come out at some point. But going into next season for One Motorsport, I don't know what it's going to look like. Do they go towards a new Civic? Do they? I don't know.
Well, Sam, I think there's a bigger question. Do they come back at all?
Sorry, say again.
I think it's a bigger question: do they come back at all? Because presumably they won't have one. I don't know. It depends what the situation is at One Motorsport. That was very much obviously Will Powell's. We understand banner, if you like. They've got an old car. They've got problems. It would appear behind the scenes as well. Do they come back at all? That's the other question.
Yeah, very much so. I think it's going to very much depend on TOCA licenses, because there was the very weird switching about of TOCA licenses before this season starts that involved Team Hard and involved Moffat going to One Motorsport and stuff like that.
Oh yeah,
So whether they've got the budget to run all three licenses, who knows? If they cut it down to a two-car team, I think they'll be more competitive. But do they still have Dynamics back in? Do Dynamics come back next season? There's lots of different things that could have an influence on what's going to happen for them.
I'll answer one of those questions. No, I don't think we see Dynamics still on the grid again. I think they're done.
Okay.
I think that's also because of Matt Neal and his own personal loss this year. I don't think that they'll be back. I think that's done personally.
Yeah.
The only question will be: does Moffat get replaced by Shedden? That's about the only thing I can think as a question.
Yeah.
Does Cook stay there? Does he move on? I don't know. But I've been put it this way: I was disappointed with them this year. Yes, Napa have dominated. Yes, Hyundai were a close second, but yeah, the Honda Civic, which has been at the sharp end for so many years, just looks so far off it this year.
An off the wall one, which I'd quite like to see Cook try out or do, is to go to Hyundai and accelerate. I think
Possibly.
it would be a good team for him. I think him and Tingram get on well. Chilton certainly hasn't performed, although there was a good start to the season. But he always
be there.
Seems to get on the grid. But if there is that rumour of Accelerate expanding still, there might be an extra seat there anyway.
Absolutely. Right, we're running out of time because we always do. So what was your favourite moment of the season? And then we'll do one thing to change for next year. So first of all, what was your favourite moment of the season?
Personally, my favourite moment of the season was race 1 at Knockhill. First of all, we were there, so it was a brilliant weekend that we had away up in Scotland, and the racing that we got that weekend was fantastic. The conditions really helped to that, but especially in that race 1 where we had drivers coming down to turn 1 in the area that we were standing with wipers on. We're going, why they got their wipers on? It's not raining. Their lights were coming on and stuff like that. And then this deluge came across the circuit from the far end, and complete chaos erupted. Sutton staying out on slick tyres, some drivers changing to wets, not changing the ride height. I think that race pretty much had everything.
Sutton nuking Cook as well, don't forget.
Yeah. I think that race had absolutely everything. It was brilliant.
Yeah, I can understand. I'm going to go for a slightly different. I'm going for Donington race 1, was it 2 or 2? The rainy race at Donington at the start of the season,
race
which
2.
was race number 2.
Yeah,
I'm only going for that one because whilst the Knockhill was crazy, the result wasn't too crazy. There wasn't, in terms of who won it and all that kind of stuff, it was still fairly, I don't know. It wasn't as unpredictable, put it that way. So I think, obviously, who won the first race at Knockhill was Watson in the end, wasn't it?
That was Hill from Watson from Collard. Because there was lots of chopping and changing after that race when drivers had disqualifications, both Chilton and Ingram.
So it was great, but it wasn't completely unpredictable. Whereas I think having Tom Chilton win a race with Sam Osborne on the podium with Adam Morgan, to me, and Nick Hamilton scoring points as well, I just think that you really got a randomised result on that one. Knockhill was fantastic, don't get me wrong, but I think that it's just the pure. I remember the most thing I remember from the Donington race was that nobody knew what was going on. Nobody knew who was where. The commentators had no idea what was going on. The scoreboard had no idea what was going on. There was no signal to get TSL timings up, so it had that real chaotic feel of, oh my God. At one point, I think people on the bank were convinced that Nick Hamilton was winning the race. Other
Yeah.
points, it was just so random. And I think that's why that one for me just pips it as my favourite moment. I mean, Jelly got fourth that day or in that race. Mikey Dober was fifth on
Yeah.
his sort of debut weekend. Andrew Watson had a really good race as well. I think, did he finish third? No, he finished.
Halstead got points.
He did get points. Yeah, How's it got points? So
Yeah.
yeah, that's right. Yeah, so yeah, it's just one of those where everything was madness, and I
Yeah, it
really,
was.
really enjoyed it. Yeah, so that for me was my rate or my moment of the year. But yeah, Knockhill was great, and so, mention, I suppose, honourable mention for Silverstone Race 2 with the fight back from Hill from Sutton and Ingram, particularly as Ingram had been torpedoed by an out of control Boutel at the earlier start of that
Yeah.
round.
Okay, then going into next season,
Yeah,
what one thing would you change?
yeah. Well, obviously, take it as read that we want a more competitive fight. Take that as read. Take it as read that we want hybrid to actually work, because despite Tim Harvey's best efforts of persuasion, it doesn't work.
Yeah.
If Sutton is dominating races with only 1 second of hybrid, it ain't working. It's as simple as
No.
that. I'm going to be really controversial with this, and it's going to make it sound really old school, and I do apologise for it, but I apologise for it in some ways. I want to see a return to two-car teams and more cars on the grid. It's not going to happen. I know it's not going to happen, but if I could change it,
More cars on the
I
grid being a bigger field, or more variation in the cars
more
on the grid?
variation. I
Okay.
don't want to see. I'm not picking on hard. I don't want to see six Cupras who have a different
Yep.
driver in each weekend. There's talks that Hyundai are going to run six. I don't want to see six Hyundais. I don't want to see four BMWs. I don't want to see four Fords. I want to see not run by the same team anyway. I actually want to
I was
see.
going to say I wouldn't mind having the amount of cars that we have at the moment.
No,
I'd like to
different
see maybe
teams.
one or two new manufacturers come in, but certainly two-car teams. I can understand where you're coming from.
I found last year really interesting, just as an example, to see the difference between how Car Gods BMWs performed to WSR BMWs, for example.
Yeah.
We've not got any of that anymore because BMW got four, Napa got four, Hyundai have four, potentially going to get six. Cupras have been six off, but they've all been in the same team. So there's actually been no real variation to actually
Yeah.
look at it. So, and I do think that we've seen problems with teams that are running multiple cars. I can't really think of a team that's done it well. I'd include Napa in that. I don't think Sam Osborne has had a particularly good year, if I'm being honest.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't think that BMW have maximised that. Or I think they've been poor this year for running four cars, for example. And I don't think Hyundai have been particularly great. Tom Ingram's been the only one that's been consistently good there. Is that because of the calibre of driver? Is that because they're overstretched running cars? I don't know. But I think that for me, I'd like to see a traditional return to 2x2x2 and a bit more variation in terms of teams, manufacturers, and colour schemes.
Okay. I'm looking more towards the overall championship and how race weekends figure themselves out. I like having the shootout qualifyings. I think we should probably have that at each
Yeah,
weekend, first of all. But I also want to change up in race one, race two, race three, and how grids are set and how we go about that throughout the weekend. I think race two is very mediocre because this year the hybrid hasn't worked in the way that Toka were looking for it to work. I think there's going to need to be a big change up on that. I don't think boosting the amount of hybrid each driver gets or working out what the allocation should be is going to be good enough to make that race change or race two change. We've had Sutton's taken a 1-2 at race one, race two at Snet, race 1-2 at Thruxton, race 1-2 at Brands. We've had so many drivers that have finished race one in the same position that they finished it in race two, which means there's not enough shuffling for me. So I think there needs to be almost a reset again on how the race weekend works itself out, especially on race two.
yeah, I can completely understand and back you on that. Yeah, I think there does need to be a change in how that works. It won't happen. Same as mine won't happen. We'll carry on regardless. They're too invested. They won't happen. It won't happen
I'd
because
also possibly like to see race three be a reversal of all point scorers rather than just a ball picked out.
Yeah, but then the argument would be it gets too gimmicky. I've long been of the opinion that race two grid should be set by the fastest laps in race one. That's
Yeah.
long been my opinion. Because if you then get a problem, your weekend isn't ruined because you can get the car back out, you can go and set a lap to try
Yes.
and get you back up the grid for race two. Because otherwise, as I said before, you get punted off by someone who's being silly and trying to be a hero for no fault of your own in a top running position, and
Yeah.
that's your weekend done
Or
because
you
you ain't
get a
getting back.
puncher or something like that.
Yeah,
There are so many different factors that can run into you having a bad race one, and that you've got to keep on fighting and fighting and fighting for the rest of the weekend. But yeah, it'd be interesting to see some of these come in. We've obviously done a 10 minutes with on things that we'd like to see introduced or changes to the championship that we'd like to have. We'd love to hear your thoughts and opinions on them as well, because getting that conversation going, you never know, it might grab some attention on social media and let the big bosses know that we want to change. You never know.
yeah. We will be back with our driver grades of the year pod shortly. We'll probably do our envelope opening maybe on that one. I don't know. We'll discuss that one, how we're
Yep.
going to do that best. And we'll be back around Christmas, as I've mentioned, when the motorsport awards come in, because nobody wants to see Christian Horner and a Dickie Bow accepting another award for Red Bull. I'd much rather see who I thought was the best livery of the year.
Yeah.
That's clearly what people would rather see. So, yeah, we'll do an award show nearer the award season in December.
Yeah, please do go and subscribe and get the bell on YouTube if you haven't done already. And do please hit that like button. It's always good to see how many of you like the content that we're making. Please do try and interact with the video. Having interactions between you and us and even other people in the community is always going to help the algorithms. And we'd love to hear your thoughts and feelings on what we do and the touring cars as a whole. But yeah, we hope you've enjoyed the review. And as Russ said, we'll be back again very soon.